Don, we talked a little bit about both the upscale market and the average market. Seems to us that the housing market is almost like a bottom-up eating food chain, right? A person sells a $200,000 house, hopefully to buy a 250, and the 250 sells to buy a 400. And if everyone is in a pinch, or we're expecting them to continue to be in a pinch, do we think that the broad economy can recover without a housing recovery?
Yes. I can say that with some confidence because the housing market's in the pits right now, and the economy's not doing awfully, even though I don't think NBR's announced the end of the recession. Profits are occurring and so on. But it's certainly going to be a drag on the economy, and I think there's a couple of reasons. One is the consumer effect that we talked about earlier. And the other one is, here's an interesting couple of numbers. During the peak of the boom, the housing sector was 6.3% of the economy, and now we're about 2.4% of the economy. So, what is that? It's more or less everything that's going on. Obviously, new construction is way down. We're at levels that occurred back. You have to go back to the 1940s, right around the World War. To find such low levels of construction. And that just sort of filters through the whole set of activities that are associated with new home buying, real estate, and so on and so forth. So that's clearly going to be a substantial drag. How long is this going to last? So that's a really interesting question. When the housing market reached a peak around 2006, and then in about 2007, we realized that it reached a peak in 2006. People started asking the question, well, how long is the downturn going to occur in the housing market? A lot of people, if you can go out and dig up some old Wall Street journals, they were saying 6 months, maybe 12 months. And obviously those people were very wrong. A number of them are in government now. My answer back then was, I was the real pessimist back then. My answer was 3 to 4 years, and if you add those together, it comes to about 2010, more or less now. So 3 years ago, I was thinking, okay, we're actually going to be recovering now in the housing market, but that's not occurring. The big worry that's out there is, are we actually going to have a severe second dip in prices? Things have leveled off. Some of the price indexes have been pretty flat for about 6 months in the housing market. What's the evidence for the big downturn that's going to occur, potentially occur in the next few months, next couple of years? Huge numbers, estimates of 5 million people that are 60 days or 90 days behind in their mortgages. All of this is occurring. All of these defaults are occurring when mortgage interest rates are really low. What if they jump up to 7-8%? Mortgage loans that were adjustable rate do start resetting. The government programs continue to not really affect too many people. They're pushing Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac very hard in very many ways to try to keep this from happening, but it really looks as if it's going to be taking another 3-4 years before I would optimistically say, okay, builders are actually going to turn around and the amount of construction is going to occur. One interesting thing that I heard a comment about is apparently, if you took an index of builders' stock values, they've gone up 30% or something this year, and the question was why? And I think that's a good question. It seems a bit premature. So, we can use one of your 5-year models and look down the road and say, gee, if things aren't looking good for at least the first 3 years of there, is there going to be a really magnificent recovery that's going to occur in the housing market? The one thing that's a little different is the United States is really unusual now. In a number of other countries, housing markets are going crazy. China, you probably have heard about that. Canada, house prices are going up in Canada. Why are they so different? Australia, New Zealand. Housing markets really depend upon perceptions. So if everybody in this room suddenly decides that house prices next year are going to go up 10%, you all are going to go out and start buying housing, it's going to turn the market around. So the real question is, when are those perceptions going to change? people's expectations of house price changes continue to be negative, and that's really a damper on demand right now.
Maybe I'll just add one thing quick. All four of those countries that you mentioned, China, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, are natural resource-based economies. So we've seen tremendous rise in prices of commodities, and I would imagine that that's a big driver of the positive sentiment in those countries. And if you saw a turnaround in the commodity price complex, which could be tied to growth in China, what happens in China may affect Australia, New Zealand, and Canada a lot more than people realize there. So some of these things, you know, how much will the situation in Greece impact the U.S. stock market, the U.S. bond market? You know, it's hard to say, but oftentimes it may be something that starts halfway around the world that ends up impacting, whether it's the housing or the stock or the bond markets, things here and other countries.
Although China, isn't it true, and maybe this is more a question, China is, or maybe I should say has learned from our mistakes a bit, because they're tightening lending standards right now, is that right? And they're also kind of tightening where you can build a home, as opposed here where it was just wide open and lending standards were easy. So I think one of the huge risks to us all is a policy mistake in China, but it seems like they're learning a bit. Now, how far they take that, I don't know, but that's a huge concern. I agree with your comments about commodity-based economies.
Right. It is interesting. A little bit of economics plays in there because they get a fair amount of local revenue, tax revenues from selling land, and you know, they're sort of cutting themselves off when they do this. So there's a tension.
Yes, yes.